Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Joanna. Good evening. Hey, it's lovely to see you all. Really good. I want you to think of a time when you have felt blessed, when you have felt that somebody or something has made you feel good. You've thought, oh, that was so nice. Does anyone want to share a time when they've thought, oh, that was lovely? It could be little or it could be big. One example I want to give you is a friend of mine when she first had her first baby. She went from working full-time and socializing with her friends from work to being at home with the baby. And babies aren't great to socialize with, actually. They don't talk much, and they kind of just lie there most of the time. And she was quite lonely. And so she would go out with the buggy, and she would push it around the streets, and she would just wait for somebody to smile at her. And when somebody smiled at her, she would go home feeling that was a good morning, a good walk, because she was so lonely that just a stranger smiling. And you know what, where she lived, there was lots of little old ladies. So little old ladies and babies are quite a thing as well. So they'd be like, oh, isn't your baby cute? And she would just, that interaction would make her feel so blessed. Those people had no idea. They were just saying goo-goo to a baby or smiling at her. But that made her feel really blessed. That's one example. Anybody want to share an example of some time they've thought, oh, that was really nice? Chris is going to be my runaround. There we go. I think it's on mute.
Hello. Once we were driving in Europe on a little driving holiday, and a train barrier came down on the back of our car and smashed our windscreen. We were in Switzerland, and we were like, what are we going to do now? And this guy just was driving past, clearly saw us, turned around and drove back. And he basically, the Swiss guy, didn't speak any English. He basically had all this stuff. He had a little vacuum. He had a little dustpan and brush, some gaffer tape. 10 minutes later, he'd gaffer taped our window up, got rid of all the glass, and we were on our way. And we're just like, we love this guy. What a nice guy.
Maybe he just drove around waiting for people's windows to break. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah.
Next.
Anyone else? Ruff's at the back. Oh, there we are.
Well, on this way. So Becky and I were on a holiday with our kids a few years ago, and our son convinced our daughter to put a hand into a machine that produced balls with sweets in. And I don't know what you call it, not an arcade machine, but a sweet machine. And she put her arm in and got it stuck. And we had to get home to get on the ferry to come home, and yet our arm was stuck in this machine, and we were in France. Didn't know how to engage with anybody, and luckily a fireman turned up, and this fireman knew exactly what to do and started dismantling the entire machine before our eyes and freed Daisy's arm.
And his wife was a nurse, and so she went and went to the shop and got bruise cream to put on, and gave it to me to put on Daisy's arm so it wouldn't bruise up. Yeah, they were wonderful.
This is slightly gushy. But yesterday I moved house, and Amal here, literally without being asked, just showed up and helped me turn what would be a 4-hour process into an hour and a half, and I could not be more grateful, and I felt very blessed for her involvement in my life in the way that I literally didn't ask. And it was almost stalkerish. She was just there. I felt very blessed.
Once everybody needed
Thank
a marvel
you.
to that last
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 11 years ago, when I got free from drugs, I went to a barbecue from like NA meeting. So they had this conference thing put together. And I saw all these recovering addicts like smiling and enjoying life. And I'm like, man, really depressed, really lost. Like, I don't want to use drugs, but the obsession to use was so strong. And I just felt like, you know, I'm never going to get what these guys have got. And this guy called Alan, I still know him today. He looked at me and he knew exactly what was going through my mind. And without saying a single word, he hugged me. And he kept me in his arms for about 2 to 3 minutes, to the point I was like, man, let go of me now. But without saying a word, it's like if he was saying to me, listen, I've been where you are. I know exactly how you're feeling, and I know that you're going to be all right. So about a month ago, I saw him, and I looked at him, and I said, you have no idea the difference that hug has made in my life. You know, so yeah, that hug was amazing.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm sure the rest of you who were slightly shyer and quieter have experiences of when something or somebody has done something or experienced something where you've gone, oh, that was really lovely, and it meant something. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So we're doing a season at the moment at sitting at the feet of Jesus, and there is a remote control and there's some slides. Whether I remember to turn them over is another thing. I didn't at all this morning, so let's see where we're going with them. Right, we're talking about sitting at the feet of Jesus, sitting and listening to the words that Jesus spoke to his friends and disciples when he was here on earth, and going, what do they mean for us today? Because if our faith is about anything, it's about the things Jesus says to us. And so today we're looking at Luke chapter 6. And the bit I want to focus on is 31, where Jesus says, do to others as you would have them do to you. Now this, if you're an RE, done your RE GCSE or A-level, probably know is called the Golden Rule, and appears in most of the main religions across the world, in one form or another. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Many of the religions have it in the opposite. I've got to get this right. Don't do anything to someone else that you wouldn't want them to do to you. So don't hit somebody because you wouldn't want them to hit you. The opposite. And many of the world's religions actually have it in the negative form rather than the positive form. But the Jews who were listening to Jesus at the time might have recognized it because it's actually in the Old Testament. And so the Jewish religion has it. And in Leviticus, that book of the Bible that you all know incredibly well, and do everything in it, particularly burning your tent if it has mildew. That's what Leviticus tells us to do. We didn't do that when our tent got mildew. We just kind of bleached it and hung it up and hoped for the best. So Leviticus is quite a challenging book, but in it says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinsfolk. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And again, it's saying, don't take vengeance. Don't do to somebody else what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Now, it's quite interesting in Leviticus. There's quite a bit you might see about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And we can look at some of those understandings and saying, oh my goodness, that's a bit radical. You know, God's saying, you know, somebody takes your eye, you take their eye. Well, when it was written, it was actually limiting. It was saying to the Jewish people, if somebody takes your cow, you can only take one cow back. Because at the time, the Jews were like many of us, let's be honest. If somebody takes one sweet, when my kids were little, if Isaac would take one of Daisy's sweets, well, Daisy would not restrict herself to taking one back. She'd want 2 or 3 back in payment. And then it escalates. And God was saying the Jews were the same. They was like, oh, he's got my cow. I'm taking 2 cows because he's had my cow a week and now I want 2 cows. And God was saying, no, we limit it. Jesus then takes the whole concept even further. And the beginning of this passage, he talks about turning the cheek. He's saying if somebody takes your cow, let them have your cow. Don't go and take a cow back. He takes what's said and takes it on an extra level. There were other rabbis at the time of Jesus who were also talking about this. talking about Rabbi Hillel the elder, as we all know him, when he was around about the same time Jesus was. And he says, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So he was saying, if you've got somebody who's a stranger with you, you're to draw them in and treat them as you would yourself. Again, this love others as love your neighbor as your friend. And we know those of us, well, many of us might remember that Jesus gets asked who is our neighbor and tells that wonderful story of the Good Samaritan. And the neighbor is the one who loves. And when we sit at the feet of Jesus and listen to what he said, sometimes, sometimes it can seem quite challenging. When he tells us to do to others as you would have them do, to love your enemies, to do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back, it can seem quite challenging. Jesus, do you really want me to go around lending everything to everybody and not worrying about getting it back? Do you really expect me to be nice and kind to my enemies? Well, the answer is yes. Jesus' teachings are incredibly challenging. And it can be easy to try and say to ourselves, well, Jesus was exaggerating for effect. That wonderful literary term that for years I was hyperbole. I used to talk about hyperbole and somebody said, actually, it's hyperbole. But when you read it, it doesn't look like hyperbole. This exaggerating for effect, it's like, no, Jesus never meant that. He's exaggerating just so we get the idea. Recently, there was an article I read that said that some church pastors are finding trouble teaching on Jesus' sayings. And it quoted a couple of pastors who were teaching on the Sermon on the Mount and mentioned this passage that we've read, talked about turning the other cheek. If somebody does something to you, you forgive them and turn the other cheek. And after the service, after the sermon, somebody came up and said, why are you teaching about this liberal woke stuff, forgiving people? And the vicar said, because it's in the Bible. And rather than the person go, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize, they said, the response was, yes, but that doesn't work anymore. It might have worked then, but it doesn't work now. It's too weak. The danger is Jesus' readings are so subversive. Jesus' teachings are so subversive. They're so different to what culture says that what we can try and do is we kind of file the edges off. We say, well, this is what Jesus says. Well, kind of, it's not really. This is what he means. And we kind of limit it. And we kind of reduce it to something that we feel is more palatable, rather than seeing them as the radical, subversive, rebellious statements that they are. Do to others as you would have them do to you. So when we hear Jesus saying these things, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, do to others as you would have them do to you, it can be tempting to say, what are you talking about, Jesus? You don't get it. You're asking me to love my enemy. You don't know what they've done to me. You don't know what they've said about me behind my back. You don't know how they've persecuted me. You don't know how they've insulted me, how they've belittled me, how they've criticized me. You don't get that, Jesus. It's all right for you to say forgive, but how can I do that? It's a different situation. Well, one of the things about Jesus, when he invites us to do things, is he only ever invites us to do the things that he has already done. This is the man who was betrayed by his friends. He was betrayed by a very good friend who he'd spent 3 years with, caring and loving and supporting. And Judas turned his back on him. He was betrayed by even one closer friend, Peter, who turned his back on him. He was convicted on nothing, and he was put on a cross where he was ridiculed, he was mocked, he was spat upon, and he died. Why did he die? Well, he died because he loved us. He died because he wanted to forgive us, and he wanted to support us, and he wanted us to be in relationship with him. Jesus died not for his own sake, but for our sake. Now, when we say that, well, we're 2,000 years later. So how could Jesus die 2,000 years ago for me today? You know, that doesn't count. Well, he died 2,000 years ago because he knew that I needed it today. Jesus has already loved his enemy. He's already turned the other cheek. And he's already done to others as he would have them done. When Jesus invites us in to do those actions and to do those things, he's only doing what we've seen him do, and he's only doing what he's already done for us. He's asking us to do for others what he's done for us. Jesus, when he died on the cross, he took our own sins. All the times we've rejected his way, all the times we've hurt others, all the times we've gone the wrong path. We've let ourselves down, we've let him down. He died for our forgiveness. For our forgiveness. He loved us before we were perfect. There's that wonderful story of the prodigal son. The father who stands waiting and waiting and waiting for his son to come back. The son who's rejected him and run away. The son comes back, he doesn't even wait for the son to say sorry. He runs to him and hugs him. And God is like that with us. He's already forgiven us. He died for us and he did everything for us when we were not in relationship with him. When we were not perfect, when we were not good, and when we were not clean. Jesus has already done all those things for us. And what he does is he invites us not to make a tick list of this is how to be a Christian. You know, if you had to write top 10 things to do to be a Christian, you know, wear sandals. I've got my sandals on today. I'm all right. You know, what would be the things on it? And Jesus isn't saying, well, here's your top 10. Love your enemies. What he's doing is he's inviting us. He's inviting us to start creating heaven on earth. At some point, heaven will come to earth again, and there will be a world where there is no pain, no sorrow, no enemies, no pain, no insults, no loneliness. It will be a beautiful and wonderful place to be. But it's not here yet. And what Jesus is doing is inviting us with him to create little seedlings of heaven on earth today. By loving our enemies, by doing unto others as we would have them do to us, by turning the other cheek, we're creating a little bit of heaven on earth. We're beginning to show others what heaven might be like. We're showing others what Jesus is and who he is and what being part of God's kingdom is like. God's kingdom isn't just to come, it's for us to show what it might be like here today. And so what Jesus is doing is he's inviting us with these comments into acting in a way that gives hints to the world as God intended it to be. That's not easy. It isn't easy. Sometimes we need to step into acting in a different way and then encourage our hearts to follow. Loving our enemies isn't easy because if we could love them, they wouldn't be our enemies, would they? They'd be friends. That's what friends are. And it's easy to love friends. But Jesus is saying, pick the people who you struggle with and be nice to them and bless them. Now, I just want to say at this point, this is not putting ourselves into a position where we are going to be hurt or so if your enemy is somebody, if in your head your enemy is somebody who has abused you or hurt you or made you into a victim, it is not putting yourself back in that person's power. That is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is loving the people we struggle with, loving the people we find hard, loving the people that we don't get on with. It's about trying to create something different. There's a wonderful story of a man who wanted to see what heaven and hell was. And so somehow, because that's how these stories happen, he managed to wander into an angel. He found an angel. And the angel said, I will show you hell, and then I will show you heaven. So the angel takes him down to hell. And there in hell are these big banqueting tables. Think Hogwarts. Big banqueting tables full of food. Think Hogwarts. You know, all this food all over it. And it's beautiful food. And it's wonderful. And it looks ripe. And it's tasty. And the guy's going, oh, I think this is quite nice. So this is, you sure you've got hell? You sure you haven't taken me to heaven? No, says the angel, this is definitely hell. And the dinner bell rings. And everybody comes in to eat. And they pick up their knives and forks. And their knives and forks are 6 foot long. Each knife is 6 foot and each fork is 6 foot. And so they're trying with these 6 foot forks to eat. And none of them have got 6 foot arms, so it doesn't work. And they're trying to kind of wedge them but they can only eat with the knives and forks. It's the only rule, is they can only eat with knives and forks. And they're getting thinner and thinner. And they're more unhappy and more grumpy because they can see the food, but they can't get it in their mouths. And so the angel says, have you seen enough? And the man says, yes, I've seen enough. The angel says, I'll take you to heaven. And the man goes, I don't think I need to go to heaven. I know what that is. You know, they have short knives and forks, don't they? Wait and see, says the angel. So they go up to heaven, and again, you've got banqueting table full of food. There's the healthy food at one end, and there's the not so healthy food, and there's the incredibly unhealthy food at the other end. It's all there. The bell goes. The people come in again. And now these people are looking very healthy. The ones in hell were looking very skinny. And so the man's think, I know what's going to happen here. And they pick up their knives and forks, and the knives and forks are 6 foot long. The man's going, but the same. And they start to eat. And the difference is, this time, they feed each other. They pick up their forks and they hold it out. Who wants a bit of sausage roll? And somebody eats a sausage roll. Who wants a bit of trifle? And somebody has trifle. They've got spoons as well. Eating trifle with a fork it's possible. Chris has done it. It's possible. And the difference is they serve one another. They work together. That's something about ushering in heaven on earth, isn't it? Is not being all out for ourselves, but looking to see how we can bless and encourage one another. The first person who picks up the fork and offers it around doesn't know whether anybody else will do the same, but they still do it. And the reality is, we find as we bless, the blessing carries on. As we do nice and kind things for others, it's interesting how many nice and kind things we find being done to us. That's not why we do them, but actually it is something that happens. There's a man called Mark Batterson who wrote a book called Double Blessing. And he says, we are blessed by God. Jesus has died. He's defeated sin. He's forgiven us, and he wants us to be in relationship with him. We are blessed by God. But we are blessed in order to bless others. We don't give back the blessing to God. Jesus doesn't need our blessing. We bless others. We give it away. And as we give it away, we're passing it on. That blessing is costly. It's inconvenient. It puts us out. It can make us look stupid, and it's not always dignified. Giving to others and blessing others is not always easy. But Jesus' blessing to us was inconvenient. It was undignified. It was public. It made Jesus look like a failure. It made him look stupid and a fool. And it was very, very costly. But in the end, it was an amazing and glorious, victorious blessing. As we give the blessing out to others, as we do to others as we would want them to do to us and have already received from Jesus, we can begin to change something about an area, about a neighborhood, about a community, because we're beginning to plant those heaven little seedlings here on earth. So, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to challenge you. I challenged this morning's congregation. I'm going to challenge you too. I wonder how we can be a blessing this week. How can we step out in a costly, silly, inconvenient way that could be a glorious blessing to others and give people a peek into what the kingdom looks like, what life was always meant to be like? God created a world that was always meant to be about people blessing each other and loving each other and caring for each other. It wasn't meant to be the opposite. So I wonder if, I'm going to give you a moment to just think, and then I wonder if you could turn perhaps to your neighbour into maybe small groups of 3 or 4 and just talk about what might it look like for you to bless your environment this week. That could be work, it could be home, it could be random community environment somehow. And I wonder whether you can come up with something that at some point this week you could do to bless others. You could decide that every morning you're going to get up and go, God, I want to bless somebody today. Give me an opportunity and show me how. Because I can guarantee if you pray that prayer in the morning and you're listening and open, he will give you opportunities during the day to bless. Because God loves blessing too. So I'm going to give you a few minutes for those who just need, well, a minute, for those who just need a thinking moment. And then we can have a talking moment. And then I'll finish in prayer. So I'll give you, well, Chris, somebody can tell me how long I can give you. But let's have a moment's silence and then turn into groups. So do you want to turn into, 3s or 4s and just have a conversation about how maybe you might bless others this week?